Queer News and Journalism is a Gay 45 original podcast published every week on Thursdays, where we come together to comment the topics in the weekly queer news published by our newsletter, The Nine. Subscribe on day45.com to get the latest news every week. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Okay, let's really unpack this. Today we're diving into a whole stack of compelling global queer news, all pulled from our Gay 45 reporting, specifically the June 25th edition of the HE9+. Our mission, like always, is to cut through all the noise, and deliver those important nuggets of knowledge, those insights, making sure you are truly well-informed about what's shaping the queer world right now.
And what's really illuminating here, I think, is just the sheer breadth of the stories we're looking at. It's quite something. You've got everything from high-stakes political moves and the really devastating impacts of global conflicts, all the way to these incredible personal triumphs and real displays of community resilience. It gives you a kind of dynamic snapshot of the queer world as it is today. And our goal isn't just reading headlines, right? It's helping you connect those dots, understand the currents underneath, and really grasp the so what behind it all. These aren't just isolated things. They're threads in a much bigger picture.
Absolutely, and it's quite a picture this week. Let's kick off with something genuinely exciting coming out of South America, Colombia. Specifically, former Bogotá mayor Claudia López. She's just launched her bid for the 2026 presidential election. Now, this is huge, not just for Colombia, but, globally, for queer representation. She's the country's first openly lesbian elected official. And she came out swinging, declared, "We begin today and we will win in a year." Just like that. López, she's 55, incredible background, former journalist, student protest leader, served in the Senate, very visible mayor of the capital. If she wins, she'd also be Colombia's first female president. And her resilience is just... wow. She survived breast cancer, past threats, including from a former governor later convicted of murder, even just days after an assassination attempt on a likely rival. She's calling for unity, urging people, we need to listen to each other again, have a coffee together again. Powerful stuff.
Yeah, and if you connect this to that bigger picture, her candidacy really goes beyond just, queer representation, important as that is. Her background as a journalist, a protest leader, plus her experience running a major city, it positions her as a really seasoned politician, someone who's maybe uniquely able to call for that kind of unity in Colombia's very complex, often conflict-ridden political scene. So it does raise a crucial question. How does visible LGBTQ plus leadership, especially from someone with her specific history of advocacy and facing adversity, how does that uniquely influence the national conversation and policy towards reconciliation? Her call for dialogue coming from that deep understanding, it could be genuinely impactful.
That's a really great point about her unique position. Okay, now let's shift over to Europe. Bit of a mixed bag here. Some exciting things, some deeply concerning developments. And here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, a bit unsettling. Austria. The government there has agreed to a bill. It basically allows state security to use what they're calling a federal Trojan to monitor encrypted chats. Think WhatsApp, Signal. Now, the stated aim is counterterrorism, fine. But privacy advocates, they're already ringing alarm bells, warning about a fundamental weakening of smartphone security for everyone.
This Austrian development immediately throws up that critical question, doesn't it, about the balance between state security and, fundamental privacy rights. What's particularly concerning, maybe even unprecedented, is that this law seems specifically aimed at the non-Austrian population. That kind of broad targeting creates a very real possibility, of surveillance in private communication spaces, like queer dating apps or even video game chats, places where marginalized groups often find safer, encrypted ways to connect. And it is really notable that Austria is the first EU country to go down this road. The chilling effect on free expression, especially for people relying on encryption for safety to avoid discrimination, you can't really overstate that. It sets a potentially dangerous precedent within the EU.
No, a dangerous precedent indeed. And speaking of discrimination enabled by, legal structures, we have to talk about something truly shocking, also in Austria. This anti-homo house in Lower Austria. It's a guest house. And it's openly advertising discrimination against queer guests under an LGBTQ agenda section, if you can believe it, calling homosexuality an anomaly, linking queer identity to pedophilia, just outrageous stuff. And the most infuriating part, this is apparently lawful. Because of a loophole in Austria's Equal Treatment Act, it protects LGBTQ plus people in employment, but not when accessing goods or services. A massive gap.
It's such a stark example, isn't it? How a specific legal loophole lets this kind of blatant offensive discrimination not just exist, but be advertised openly. Despite public outrage, most modern non-discrimination laws cover places like hotels, restaurants, public accommodations. Austria's law, by leaving out this crucial protection for LGBTQ plus people just leaves them vulnerable to being turned away. Advocacy groups are, quite rightly, pushing hard for reforms, but the governing coalition seems hesitant. It really highlights that ongoing, sometimes really nitty-gritty battle for comprehensive protections, even within the EU, where you might assume, a stronger baseline. The risk here is that this kind of overt discrimination could embolden others if it's not shut down quickly by changing the law.
It really is astonishing that loophole exists. And, kind of related, we're seeing similar legislative fights playing out more broadly, hitting fundamental rights. At the EU level, the Commissioner for Human Rights, Michael O'Flaherty, he's had to step in. He's urging Slovakia's parliament to uphold human rights because they're looking at constitutional amendments that would only legally recognize male and female genders, effectively erasing trans and intersex people from legal recognition.
Yeah, this is a direct and deeply concerning challenge to the lived realities of trans and intersex people. It could severely restrict their human rights across so many areas: documentation, healthcare access, just basic recognition, protection from discrimination. Slovakia's increasingly conservative stance is part of a worrying trend we're seeing in some parts of the EU. And this situation poses a really important question for the whole bloc, doesn't it? How far can one country's laws deviate from established international human rights standards before it triggers some kind of broader, decisive EU action? It's a real test of those core EU values: human dignity, equality. We need to watch how the EU responds here.
Definitely one to watch. Okay, moving from legislative battles to legal controversies, another story out of Germany. It involves the extradition of a 24-year-old non-binary German national, Majati, from Hungary. This has sparked urgent calls from the Greens in Germany for the government to secure their return. Majati was arrested in Berlin, extradited, even though there was a late court ruling against it. They're accused of violent acts against right-wing extremists. What's particularly alarming, though, is their lawyer's report, saying Majati has been subsisting only on liquids for 8 days, protesting solitary confinement and really poor prison conditions.
This situation immediately flags grave concerns. About human rights, yes, but specifically prison conditions and the treatment of non-binary individuals within foreign legal systems. These reports from the lawyer about a hunger strike due to solitary and substandard conditions, they demand urgent attention. And the strong political pressure being pushed by German parties like the Greens, it really underscores that state responsibility for its citizens' welfare, even when they're accused of crimes abroad. It shows how these personal legal fights can quickly blow up into broader international human rights issues, especially when there are concerns about due process, humane treatment. Majati's identity as non-binary adds another layer, doesn't it? Vulnerability, specific care needs that have to be addressed in prison.
Absolutely. Still in Germany, staying with the political side of things, there's this kind of baffling controversy around Berlin Pride. The Bundestag's own queer employee network, they've actually been banned from participating in Berlin's Christopher Street Day parade by the parliament president, Julia Klöckner. Citing political neutrality, this has predictably sparked outrage from the Greens, the Left Party, union leaders, calling it a political and moral failure. And it includes restricting flying the rainbow flag over the Reichstag building, too.
Yeah, if you connect that to the bigger picture, it's genuinely surprising. And frankly, it feels like a step backwards, especially since the Bundestag network marched in previous years. That political neutrality argument feels, well, thin. When applied to a parade celebrating human rights and identity, it sends completely the wrong and unnecessary signal, particularly now, when growing threats against queer communities are a very real, documented concern across Europe globally. Okay, Berlin's mayor is still attending, but this incident highlights that ongoing tension, doesn't it? Between an institution wanting to appear neutral and its responsibility to show public solidarity with marginalized groups. And it makes you ask, whose neutrality is really being protected? Is it nonpartisanship, or is it maybe a quiet withdrawal of support?
That's a really sharp question. Now, completely switching gears, let's head to the Philippines for a quite surprising voice. Vice President Sara Duterte. She's publicly identified as part of the LGBTQ plus community herself, and she's urged the nation to safeguard LGBTQ plus rights during Pride Month, which is pretty remarkable, given she's the daughter of a former president who faced international charges. She called for inclusivity, protection for the most vulnerable, saying diversity is essential to the Filipino identity.
What's particularly compelling here is seeing such a prominent political figure, especially one with, let's say, complex family ties, like Vice President Duterte speaking out so strongly for LGBTQ plus rights. And her statement wasn't just symbolic platitudes. She acknowledged persistent problems, like workplace discrimination, which are still real issues in the Philippines. It really shows that even within complicated, sometimes challenging political landscapes, you can get voices from within the establishment advocating for queer communities. And her message reinforces that profound idea, right? When we safeguard LGBTQ plus rights, we reinforce the foundations upon which all our freedoms rest. It's a powerful validation from within and could potentially shift public discussion in a region where that kind of high-level political support isn't always common.
It's definitely significant. Okay, from political statements now to the really harsh realities of conflict, this is a truly heartbreaking story. The ongoing war between Israel and Iran has had a devastating impact in Tel Aviv. An Iranian missile strike completely destroyed Mash Central, which is the last remaining gay bar in the city. This place just blocks from the U.S. Embassy. It wasn't just a bar. It was widely known as a safe haven for LGBTQ plus communities there. The images we saw on Gay 45, just ruins. And this tragedy also led to Tel Aviv canceling its annual Pride Parade, a huge loss.
Yeah, that incident is just devastating. It goes so much further than just destroying a building. It's the loss of a critical safe space for minorities to express themselves. In a region already full of tension, Tel Aviv has spent years marketing itself as this progressive, LGBTQ-friendly spot in the Middle East. So the destruction of its last gay bar standing, it's such a stark, deeply symbolic reminder of how conflict hits vulnerable communities disproportionately, how it dismantles these essential havens. These places aren't just venues, they're like lifelines for community, support, identity. Losing them in wartime just underscores this global fragility, the heightened vulnerability of queer communities when geopolitics explode.
That's a really powerful way to put it, the symbolic weight. And speaking of community challenges, but maybe on a different front, let's go across the pond to the UK. Liverpool Pride has been canceled this year. The reason? Significant financial and organizational challenges. Organizers pointed specifically to rising costs and, crucially, major sponsors pulling out.
This cancellation, unfortunately, does raise that important question about the long-term sustainability of these really big Pride events. We've actually seen a bit of a trend, haven't we? Reduced corporate sponsorship for Pride globally, not just the UK. Could be economic pressure, sure, but maybe also some backlash against DEI programs, making companies a bit more wary about very public LGBTQ plus support. And the fact that last year's Liverpool Pride brought in, an estimated £6 million to the local economy, it just highlights the significant loss, cultural and economic, when these events can't happen. But what's inspiring, despite this, is the community's commitment. Fundraising efforts, finding new ways, maybe more grassroots ways to celebrate and support each other, shows real resilience.
That resilience is absolutely key. And on a much, much brighter note, Black queer communities across the U.S. are marking Juneteenth this year with renewed pride, powerfully merging that celebration of emancipation with Black LGBTQ plus empowerment. And the core message coming through loud and clear is, freedom means all of us or none of us.
What's truly fascinating and just profoundly important here is that deliberate centering of intersectional liberation. It's so key. These events, parades, cultural festivals, combining Juneteenth and Pride, they're powerful affirmations. Saying Black Pride isn't just some add-on to Juneteenth. No, it's integral to its power, its purpose. They highlight progress, yes, but also those ongoing interconnected challenges in racial justice and queer rights. By weaving these movements together, they emphasize that real liberation has to include all identities. Acknowledging the unique struggles of Black queer folks, creating a much more inclusive vision of freedom.
It's a beautiful and absolutely necessary coming together. And speaking of inspiring stories, maybe hidden histories, there's a new documentary called Sally. It sheds really intimate light on astronaut and physicist Sally Ride, the first American woman in space. It explores her pioneering science role, obviously, but also, really poignantly, her long-hidden romantic relationship with former tennis player Tam O'Shaughnessy, a love story kept secret for 27 years.
Yeah, this film is such a powerful testament, isn't it? To a love kept private for nearly 3 decades. A time when being open about your queer identity could have absolutely torpedoed a high-profile career like hers. Especially in science, government. It raises that important question about the huge personal sacrifices people made back then for their careers in less accepting times, the toll secrecy takes. By finally bringing Sally Ride's full, authentic self to light, the doc really lends renewed cultural urgency and emotional resonance to today's debates about diversity, inclusion, the need for psychological safety in federal agencies, workplaces everywhere. It's a compelling reminder of how far we've come, but also how history shapes these current conversations.
It definitely adds a vital human layer to her incredible legacy.
Okay, let's wrap this segment with another really inspiring coming out story, this time in sports. U.S. volleyball captain Eric Shoji. Olympic medalist, he's publicly come out as queer during Pride Month, saying it feels scary but freeing at the same time, and he believes he's stronger, more confident, and more sure of myself than I've ever been, which is just fantastic to hear. Eric Shoji's courage, his authenticity, it's truly inspiring, and his decision to come out, especially as a team captain, an Olympic medalist in a major sport, that carries immense weight. This kind of visibility from prominent figures, it profoundly helps others, you know? Inspires younger athletes, challenges those old hyper-masculine norms in sports, and contributes directly to a more accepting, more inclusive environment. When someone like him says they feel completely free and myself, that sends such a powerful message, way beyond the volleyball court. It's a huge step forward for LGBTQ plus representation and acceptance in sports globally. Really helps normalize queer identity at the highest levels.
Okay, let's dive into our final segment now. And we start with a fascinating economic finding, something that should really make us all think. Here's a genuinely surprising fact, maybe. A new Finnish study from Aalto and Vaasa universities. They found that companies with LGBTQ inclusive policies are significantly more innovative. How much? Filing 20% more patents, receiving 25% more academic citations. That's a measurable impact.
Right. It really underscores the tangible economic value of diversity, going way beyond just social equity or, corporate box ticking. And the findings held true across different political contexts, different economic situations, suggesting it's kind of a universal principle. Inclusive environments just foster creativity and innovation. But why? Well, the thinking is when employees feel psychologically safe, truly valued for who they are authentically, they're just more likely to bring unique perspectives, challenge assumptions, take those creative risks that lead to breakthroughs. So it raises this crucial question, doesn't it? Especially with the political backlash we're seeing in the U.S. against diversity programs. Is ignoring diversity policies not just socially backward, but actually economically short-sighted, potentially a major competitive disadvantage? The data certainly seems to point that way.
That's a very compelling business case for inclusion, isn't it? Okay, let's shift to culture and history now, starting with a London exhibition. At Studio Voltaire, there's It's a Love Thing, spotlighting over 3 decades of grassroots LGBTQ plus sexual health campaigns. And it powerfully links the HIV/AIDS crisis to the political attacks on trans rights happening right now, using a mix of old archival posters and new work by contemporary photographers.
What's truly remarkable here is how these community-led efforts just stepped up, filled those critical gaps left by governments that often stigmatized, neglected, or even criminalized queer healthcare during the AIDS crisis. The exhibition really highlights the power of positive visual messaging, challenging those dominant and often fear-based narratives. And it crucially expands the historical record, too, showing how these campaigns supported marginalized communities, like queer people of color, pushing back against that early framing of HIV as mainly a white, gay male issue, and the inclusion of strong trans representation. That reflects our evolving understanding of identity and health, showing how those past struggles for sexual health, for bodily autonomy, are directly connected to today's fights for trans rights and visibility. It's a powerful lesson in resilience, adaptation.
From London to Berlin now, continuing the cultural journey. In Germany, the Schwuls Museum is celebrating the incredible legacy of photographer and activist Petra Gall. Her archive meticulously documents West Berlin's really vibrant punk, women's, and lesbian scenes starting back in 1981.
Yeah, Gall's collection, it's over 200,000 photographs, offers this incredibly raw portrayal of feminist energy and queer cultural life from such a pivotal time. And as the museum directors rightly say, her work feels more relevant today than it has been for a long time. This kind of deep dive into historical archives, it's absolutely crucial for understanding the roots, the evolution of today's LGBTQ plus movements. It reminds us that today's struggles have deep historical foundations in counterculture, in community building. Her photos don't just document the past, they really resonate with ongoing fights for identity, freedom, self-expression, offering inspiration, context for activism now, brings history alive.
Finally, we do need to acknowledge a difficult piece of news before we wrap up. Gay porn actor Austin Wolf, his legal name is Justin Heath Smith, is expected to plead guilty to at least one federal charge relating to the distribution and receipt of child sexual abuse material. A plea hearing was scheduled for Friday, June 20th.
Right. The FBI investigation alleged he exchanged hundreds of explicit videos. This is obviously a very serious legal matter, with potential for significant prison time. We will, of course, keep following any developments in this case as they happen.
Okay. As we wrap up our deep dive into all these global stories, let's pause and consider our quote of the week. It comes from brand consultant Eugene Healy, and it's definitely thought-provoking. He says, "To understand why authenticity is impossible, first we need to understand what social media has done to us. It's turned personal identity into performance art, and in doing so, has transformed us all into brands."
That quote really does raise an important and pretty complex question for all of us, doesn't it? Especially perhaps within the queer community, where identity, visibility, self-expression, they're so central to our liberation. If our personal identity can feel like performance art online, how do we even navigate that tension? How do we maintain genuine authenticity in a world that increasingly pushes us to curate ourselves, to brand ourselves?
It's fascinating because historically, so much of queer identity formation relied on finding authentic community, finding safe spaces, often the only places you could be truly yourself. Now, a lot of that community exists online, but with this added layer of, well, performance. So what does true freedom really mean for our identities, both online and offline? When we're constantly navigating this balance between visibility, representation, and that pressure to present a certain polished image, it's a challenge, isn't it, to stay true to ourselves while also trying to be seen and understood in these online arenas.
Exactly. It makes you really ponder how the very tools that give us connection, give us visibility, might also be subtly reshaping how we even understand ourselves. It's a constant negotiation, I suppose. And maybe the key isn't to reject the performance entirely, but to stay critically aware of its influence and to actively seek out those spaces online or offline where that raw, uncurated self can still breathe and thrive.
Wow, okay, that was a truly expansive deep dive today. So much covered. For those of you who want to go even deeper, please don't forget our must-read of GOI 45 section this week. We've got some really excellent original journalism and culture picks for you. First up, we have Jude Jones's insightful review on that new documentary about Sally Ride. The first American woman in space really gets into her groundbreaking life and that hidden love story. And if you're interested in the complexities of human rights, international law, check out the investigative report by Taylor Abbott and Razvan Ayan. It's titled The Case of Majiti Arrest, Extradition, and Legal Controversy. Really detailed. For entertainment, our film of the week is the BBC's new TV series, What It Feels Like for a Girl. It's based on Paris Lee's brilliant coming-of-age memoir set against that electric Y2K club scene. Looks amazing. Our book of the week is Shattered by Hanif Qureshi. These are powerful, incredibly intimate diary entries he dictated from a hospital bed after a life-altering accident. It's about writing as a lifeline. And for music of the week, check out British metalcore stalwarts Architects.
Their 11th album, The Classic Symptoms of a Broken Spirit, it's being called a genre-defying triumph.
Yeah, engaging with all these Gay 45 original deep dives, from the tough investigative pieces to the really profound art and cultural explorations, it helps us not just stay informed, right? But also connect with all the diverse narratives, the different experiences shaping the queer world, offering both that critical insight and hopefully some profound inspiration too.
Next week, more news, hopefully better news. You can also listen to any of our articles. Visit gay45.com to read more quality journalism.